An 18-year-old girl walked into a cockpit during a routine flight and did something so unexpected, so brilliant, that aviation experts around the world had to rewrite their emergency protocols. What she discovered in those terrifying moments changed how we think about courage, quick thinking, and the incredible power of trusting your instincts when everyone else has given up. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. And please like and subscribe for more videos like this. Sarah Chen was not supposed to be anywhere near the cockpit that day. She was sitting in seat 14C on flight 829, heading home to San Francisco after visiting her grandmother in Chicago. Sarah had just graduated high school 2 months earlier and was starting college in the fall. She wanted to study engineering, maybe work in aerospace someday. She loved how things worked, loved taking apart machines and putting them back together. Her room at home was filled with half-built projects, circuit boards, old radios she had salvaged and repaired. Her parents called her their little inventor. Sarah was quiet, thoughtful, the kind of person who observed everything but said very little. She carried a notebook everywhere, filling it with sketches and ideas and questions about how the world operated. On this particular flight, Sarah had been reading about aircraft hydraulic systems. She had checked out a library book about aviation, mechanics, and was absorbed in a chapter about backup control systems when the plane hit turbulence. It was not unusual turbulence at first, just some bumps that made the seatbelt sign ding on. People shifted in their seats, closed their laptop screens, waited for it to pass. But then the plane dropped. Not a little dip, but a stomach-lurching fall that sent loose items flying toward the ceiling. Overhead bins popped open. A woman screamed. The plane shuddered violently, tilted hard to the right, then overcorrected to the left. Sarah gripped her armrests and looked out the window. They were at 35,000 feet, and something was very wrong. The wing flaps were moving erratically, jerking up and down in a way that made no sense. Sarah had just read about this exact problem in her book. Hydraulic failure. The flight attendants were struggling to stay upright as the plane pitched and rolled. One of them, a young man named Kevin, was thrown against the galley wall. He grabbed the intercom and tried to call the cockpit, but there was no response. He tried again. Nothing. The passengers were panicking now, crying, praying, clutching each other. The plane was bucking like a wild animal, climbing and dropping in sickening waves. Sarah felt her ears pop from the rapid altitude changes. This was not normal turbulence. This was a plane losing control. Kevin made his way down the aisle, holding onto seatbacks for stability, and knocked hard on the cockpit door. No response. He knocked again, shouting. Still nothing. He pulled out his emergency key and unlocked the door. What he saw made his blood run cold. The captain was slumped forward, unconscious. The co-pilot was desperately trying to control the plane with one hand while holding an oxygen mask to his face with the other. The cockpit was filled with thin smoke, some kind of electrical fire that had been extinguished but had filled the space with toxic fumes. The co-pilot looked back at Kevin with wild, unfocused eyes. He was clearly affected by smoke inhalation, his movements sluggish and confused. "I cannot," he mumbled. "The controls, they are not responding. I cannot." And then he collapsed too, the oxygen mask falling from his hand. Kevin stood frozen in the doorway, staring at two unconscious pilots and a plane that was spiraling out of control. He had no idea what to do. He could not fly. None of the other flight attendants could fly. He grabbed the radio and screamed for help, But in his panic, he could not figure out which button to press, which frequency to use. Behind him, passengers were screaming. The plane rolled sharply to the left, and Kevin was thrown against the cockpit wall. That is when Sarah appeared in the doorway. She had unbuckled despite the chaos and made her way forward, her notebook still clutched in her hand. She took one look at the situation and her mind went into overdrive. She had been reading about this exact scenario just minutes ago. Hydraulic failure combined with pilot incapacitation. The book had described it as the worst possible emergency, nearly impossible to survive. But the book had also mentioned something else, a backup system that most people did not know existed. Sarah pushed past Kevin and slid into the captain's seat. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was crystal clear. She had never touched real flight controls before, but she understood the principles. She understood the systems, and right now, understanding the systems was the only thing that mattered. The primary flight controls were dead, just as she expected. The yoke moved freely in her hands, disconnected from the control surfaces. The plane was essentially flying itself, badly, with no human guidance. Most people would have given up at this point. But Sarah remembered something from her reading. Modern aircraft have multiple redundant systems. If the primary hydraulics fail, there is a secondary system. And if that fails, there is a manual reversion mode that almost nobody knows how to use because it is so rarely needed. Sarah started scanning the overhead panel, looking for the switches she had seen in the diagrams. Her hands moved quickly, flipping switches, trying to activate the backup system. Nothing happened. The plane continued its violent dance through the sky. People were going to die. 230 people were going to die unless Sarah could figure this out in the next few minutes. She closed her eyes and visualized the diagram from her book. The manual reversion system required a specific sequence. You had to isolate the failed hydraulic system first, then activate the backup pumps, then manually unlock the mechanical linkages. It was a procedure that took trained pilots several minutes to complete, even in calm conditions. Sarah had seconds, and she had never done it before. She found the hydraulic isolation switches and started flipping them off one by one, watching the indicators. Green light, red light, there. System 2 was the failed system. She isolated it. Then she found the backup pump switches and activated them. She heard a whining sound as the pumps spun up. The pressure gauges started to climb. It was working, but the controls still were not responding. Sarah frantically scanned the panel, trying to remember what came next. The mechanical linkages. They had automatic locks that engaged during a hydraulic failure to prevent the control surfaces from flapping freely in the wind. She needed to unlock them manually, but where were the controls? Sarah looked down at the center pedestal and saw a panel she had not noticed before. She yanked it open and found a series of mechanical levers, each one labeled aileron lock, elevator lock, rudder lock. She pulled them all. The plane shuddered as the control surfaces suddenly reconnected. Sarah grabbed the yoke and felt resistance. It was incredibly heavy, much harder to move than she had imagined, but it was responding. She pulled back gently and the plane's nose started to rise. The sickening downward spiral began to level out. She pushed the yoke right and the plane slowly rolled back to level flight. It was working. She was actually controlling the plane. Behind her, Kevin was staring in disbelief. The passengers had fallen silent, sensing that something had changed, that the violent chaos had suddenly smoothed into controlled flight. Sarah's arms were burning from the effort of moving the heavy controls, but she kept her grip firm, her movements small and deliberate. She had no idea how to land the plane, but right now, keeping it in the air was enough. She reached for the radio panel and pressed what she hoped was the right button. "This is Flight 829, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "We have dual pilot incapacitation and primary hydraulic failure. I am a passenger. I have stabilized the aircraft using manual reversion mode, but I need help. I need someone to talk me through landing this plane." There was a long silence on the radio. Then a voice came through, sharp with disbelief. "Say again, Flight 829. Did you say a passenger is flying the aircraft?" "Yes," Sarah said. "I am 18 years old. I have never flown before, but I know the systems and the plane is stable. I need help landing." What happened next became the stuff of aviation legend. Air traffic control patched Sarah through to a senior pilot instructor named Captain Rodriguez. He had 40 years of flying experience and had trained thousands of pilots, but he had never, in his entire career, talked a complete novice through landing a wide-body jet with failed hydraulics in manual reversion mode. It should have been impossible. But as Captain Rodriguez started talking to Sarah, asking her questions about the aircraft state, the control responses, the system configuration, he realized something remarkable. This girl understood the aircraft better than some of his students. She was not just blindly following instructions. She was thinking, analyzing, anticipating problems before they occurred. Captain Rodriguez walked Sarah through every step. He told her how to find the nearest airport, how to program the autopilot for heading even though the altitude hold was not working. He explained how to manage her descent, how to calculate her approach speed with the extra drag from the damaged hydraulics. Sarah absorbed it all, her engineer's mind processing the information, connecting it to things she had read, things she had learned from books and manuals and late-night research sessions. The airport came into view 30 minutes later. Runway 28 left, long and wide, lined with emergency vehicles. Every fire truck, every ambulance in the city was there. The airport had been cleared. Nothing else was moving. Just Flight 829, limping toward the ground with an 18-year-old girl at the controls. Sarah began her descent, fighting the heavy controls, making constant adjustments. The plane wanted to roll left. She corrected. It wanted to drop too fast. She corrected. Every movement took all her strength. Sweat poured down her face. Her arms screamed in pain, but she kept her focus absolute, her mind clear. At 1,000 feet, Captain Rodriguez told her to extend the landing gear. Sarah found the control and pulled it. The plane shuddered as the wheels dropped. At 500 feet, she extended the flaps as far as the damaged hydraulics would allow. The runway was right there, rising up to meet her. Captain Rodriguez's voice was calm in her ear. "You are doing perfect, Sarah. Just a little more. Keep your speed steady. When you see the runway threshold pass under your nose, start pulling back. Pull hard. It will take a lot of force." Sarah nodded, even though he could not see her. The threshold markers flashed beneath the nose. She pulled back on the yoke with everything she had. The plane's nose came up. The back wheels touched the runway with a jolt that rattled her teeth. The nose wheels slammed down. Sarah immediately pulled the thrust reversers, just as Captain Rodriguez had instructed. The plane shook violently as the engines roared, slowing them down. They rolled and rolled, eating up the runway. Sarah had no idea if they would stop in time. But slowly, gradually, the plane decelerated. They came to a complete stop with 300 feet of runway left. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then the cabin behind Sarah exploded with cheers, with crying, with shouts of relief and joy. Sarah sat in the captain's seat, her whole body shaking, her hands still locked on the yoke. Kevin burst into tears and hugged her from behind. The passengers stormed the cockpit, everyone trying to see the girl who had saved them, trying to thank her, to touch her, to confirm she was real. Emergency crews surrounded the plane. Paramedics rushed aboard to treat the two pilots, who were both still alive. The captain regained consciousness as they lifted him onto a stretcher. He looked at Sarah with confusion. "Who landed the plane?" he asked. "She did," Kevin said, pointing at Sarah. "An 18-year-old passenger." The captain stared at Sarah like she was a ghost. "That is impossible," he whispered. "Manual reversion mode, dual hydraulic failure, you cannot. Nobody can." But Sarah had. And when the aviation authorities downloaded the flight data recorder and saw exactly what she had done, how she had diagnosed the problem, activated systems that most pilots did not even know existed, and landed a crippled aircraft with zero flight experience. They were stunned into silence. Within 24 hours, Sarah's story was international news. Aviation experts analyzed every second of the flight. They called it a miracle. They called it the most remarkable emergency landing in commercial aviation history. Airlines wanted to study what she had done. Flight schools wanted to use it as a teaching example. The aircraft manufacturer wanted to meet her, to understand how a teenager with no formal training had operated their systems better than pilots with thousands of hours of experience. But Sarah did not want fame. She just wanted to understand why the hydraulic system had failed in the first place. So she spent the next week reading accident reports, studying the aircraft's maintenance history, asking engineers questions that made them think harder about their own designs. She discovered that the failure had been caused by a design flaw that nobody had noticed before, a weakness in how the hydraulic lines were routed near an electrical panel. Under certain specific conditions, an electrical fire could damage all three hydraulic systems simultaneously. It was a 1 in a million scenario, but it had happened. And because of Sarah's discovery, every aircraft of that model was modified within 6 months. A flaw that could have caused future disasters was eliminated. Sarah received offers from every major aerospace company in the world, scholarships to any university she wanted, interviews with presidents and prime ministers, but she turned most of it down. She enrolled in her local state university, studied mechanical engineering like she had always planned. She just wanted to learn, to understand how things worked, to make them better. 5 years later, Sarah Chen graduated top of her class with a degree in aerospace engineering. She was immediately hired by an aircraft manufacturer, where she now designs emergency backup systems, working to make sure that what happened on Flight 8 to 9 could be survived by any pilot. Not just a girl who happened to have read the right book at the right time. The passengers from Flight 829 stay in touch with Sarah. They send her birthday cards, graduation gifts, wedding invitations. They call themselves Sarah's Miracles. Every year, on the anniversary of the flight, they gather for a reunion. And every year, they tell the story of the quiet 18-year-old girl who refused to panic, who trusted what she knew, who looked at an impossible situation and found a solution that nobody else could see. Sarah never thinks of herself as a hero. She just thinks of herself as someone who is paying attention, who had prepared without knowing she was preparing, who was in the right place at the right time with the right knowledge. But to 230 people, and to every pilot who has studied what she did that day, Sarah Chen is proof that courage is not about being fearless. It is about acting despite the fear. It is about trusting yourself when nobody else can. It is about the incredible things that become possible when preparation meets opportunity. And it is about how one person, no matter how young, no matter how inexperienced, can change everything if they are willing to step forward when everyone else has stepped back. What Sarah did in that cockpit shocked every pilot in the world, not because it was impossible, but because it proved that impossible is just a word we use before someone shows us it can be done. So, if you like this video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this.